There's one thing no one tells you when you're young. You don't have to win someone to be loved. And yet, most men grow up believing the opposite, that they must chase, prove, and impress just to catch a woman's attention. From awkward pickup lines to gifts and romantic texts, many men spend years trying to convince someone else, "I'm worthy." But the more they try, the more they lose touch with themselves. The harder they chase a woman's gaze, the further they drift from their own center. And after years of playing the game, some men stop and ask, "Am I in love?" or just begging for it. The truth is this: women aren't drawn to men who know how to perform. They're drawn to men who know how to be present, not with rehearsed compliments or textbook charm, but with a grounded presence, a quiet, steady energy that doesn't shout but cannot be ignored. Such a man isn't trying to make anyone like him. He simply is, fully, deeply, and without needing validation. And that alone awakens something primal in a woman's mind: attention. Not because he's flashy, but because he doesn't need to be. Not because he's chasing attraction, but because he isn't. In this piece, I won't hand you dating tricks or empty advice. Instead, we'll explore the deeper layers of feminine psychology, truths that most women won't say out loud, but that stir something inside them when they're near a man with true inner strength. These 10 truths aren't meant to be memorized or applied like tactics. They're meant to be embodied, so you can become a man who is calm, self-possessed, and never needs to win a woman because your very presence makes her want to stay. 1. The mystery that hooks her mind. Here's a truth few ever say out loud, but one you'll recognize if you've paid close attention. Women aren't drawn to things they can figure out too quickly. What lingers in their thoughts, what stirs their hearts, is not clarity, but curiosity. A man who's not easy to read, who doesn't reveal everything right away, who holds parts of himself back, not out of strategy, but simply because he doesn't need to explain, leaves a mark far deeper than the loudest one in the room. This isn't a trick. It's not about playing games. Real mystery isn't about hiding. It's about having no urge to expose. He doesn't rush to explain who he is, doesn't try to prove he's good, doesn't need to be understood immediately. He lets things unfold like a quiet stream moving through a forest. Those who are present will pause and listen. Those in a hurry will walk right past, but those who truly hear that gentle sound won't forget it. Women are incredibly attuned to energy. When standing before a man who's grounded, unshaken, unmoved by the emotional noise around him, they begin to wonder, what's he thinking? Why do I feel like I have to be careful around him? Why is he saying nothing? Yet I can't look away. Once these questions rise inside a woman, they stay. Not because you're pulling her in, but because she chooses to lean closer. Not because you're dazzling, but because something about you can't be named, and that's exactly what she wants to touch. But make no mistake, there's a fine line between being unpredictable and being performative. Some men try to act mysterious, calculated silence, forced coldness, emotional manipulation. That's not depth. That's drama. And any woman with wisdom will see through it in seconds. What truly stirs her is not empty silence. It's quiet depth. The kind that comes from a man who knows himself so well he doesn't need to say much. A man who's not trying to be an enigma. He is, simply because his soul has more depth than display. You don't need to act mysterious when you are profound. You don't need to withhold words when your inner world already rests in stillness. Live honestly. Don't perform. Don't brand yourself. Don't chase validation. That alone will set you apart, because women aren't drawn to what they can see. They're drawn to what they can feel but can't explain. A still gaze, a presence that doesn't shout, a silence that carries weight. And in a world of loud voices, bright colors, and desperate displays, the man who quietly keeps part of himself unshown is the one she'll want to uncover again and again. 2. Emotional presence. She feels you, even when you say nothing. Some men are always trying to tell women how much they love them, how good they are, how deeply they care. But in the end, what women remember is never the words. It's how they felt in your presence. Because what touches a woman's heart doesn't enter through her ears. It comes through the emotional space you create when you're with her. It's not about how you say, "I love you." It's whether you're truly there when she speaks. It's not how well you handle the calm. It's how steady you remain when the storm comes. A woman doesn't need a man who reacts to every little change in her emotions. She needs someone who won't be swept away when she can't even control her own waves. When she's confused, upset, or overwhelmed, she doesn't need you to fix her. She doesn't need a solution. She needs a presence. Something still, something safe, something that holds space without judgment. You can be quiet. You can just listen without comforting, without correcting. And in that silence, you send the loudest message. I'm not shaken. You're safe here. That's what women crave deep down. Not a man who always knows what to say, but a man who's calm enough to let her unravel and not run. Picture this. There are two kinds of men. One always reacts, jumping in to fix, to explain, to offer advice. The other does nothing, and yet somehow you feel at peace just being near him. One stirs up motion, the other becomes a quiet anchor. And the mature woman, she'll choose the anchor every time, because emotional presence isn't about understanding everything. It's about not drowning in what's not yours. It's about staying close without taking over. It's about making space for her to be fully herself without losing yourself in the process. There's something powerful about masculine stillness. It doesn't speak loudly, but it's always felt. It doesn't dominate, but it leads. It doesn't try too hard, yet somehow it holds everything together. Women aren't looking for men who solve every problem. They're drawn to men who stay unshaken when the problem arrives. They don't want someone to tell them what to do. They want someone to stay, without blame, without fixing, without retreat. And in that presence, without words, without drama, without display, you become the rare kind of man a woman doesn't want to lose. Not because you do so much, but because when she's around you, she finally feels free to just be herself. 3. The quiet space that makes her start wondering. There's something fascinating about a woman's emotional world. Sometimes it's not your presence that makes her realize how she feels. It's your absence. Think about it. When you text her every day, respond to every emotion, always show up on cue, she gets used to it. It becomes routine. But when you slow down, not abruptly, not as a tactic, just naturally pull back a little, you create a strange kind of space, a quiet gap that makes her wonder, why hasn't he messaged me? Did I do something wrong? Am I still important to him? What you've created isn't a sense of lack. You've created a space for her real feelings to rise. When you're constantly present, her mind can stay distracted with everything else. But when you gently step back, no guilt, no games, no explanations. Her focus turns inward. She begins to reflect. And that is what separates a man who plays games from a man who lives in truth. The one who plays games disappears strategically, hoping she'll chase. But a man of depth withdraws for himself, not to get a reaction, but to live his life fully, whether near or apart. His absence doesn't come from manipulation. It comes from freedom. And freedom has a pull of its own. It doesn't make her feel controlled. It makes her realize she's standing before something real, something not easily possessed. Women are highly attuned to emotional authenticity. They can feel when your presence is sincere, and they can feel when your silence isn't born from pain or resentment, but from a full, grounded life. In those moments, she'll look into the space you've left and begin to ask herself, what did I take for granted? Why does his silence make me feel uneasy? True attraction isn't built by being constantly available. It's built by being meaningful even when you're not around. The man a woman remembers most isn't the one who's always present. It's the one whose absence leaves an echo. And you'll notice something powerful when you stop trying to hold on, when you live truthfully, without fear. The right woman won't drift away. She'll come back. Not because you pulled her, but because you created space she wants to return to. In a world where everyone's trying to impress, the man who knows how to pause at the right time will stand out in a way that's not loud, but unforgettable. 4. Masculine calm, when she can't control the rhythm anymore. In most relationships, it's the woman who sets the emotional rhythm. She leads through questions, gestures, subtle shifts in mood. And most men follow without even realizing they're being led. Some give in, some push back, but very few remain still. So when a man doesn't react the way she expects, When he doesn't raise his voice, doesn't rush to explain himself, doesn't smooth the tension with meaningless comfort. She's caught off guard. Suddenly she can't control the flow. Her usual emotional rhythm stops working. And that moment of stillness she can't shake. That's when she begins to really notice him. Not because he's suppressing anger, not because he's trying to win, but because he simply refuses to trade his inner peace for emotional chaos. A man's strength isn't shown by how fast he reacts. It's shown by how well he doesn't. It's the power of non-reaction, the quiet awareness that every person has the right to carry their own storm. And you don't need to jump into it just to prove you care. You just stand there, like a stone wall, solid, unshaken, soft-spoken, but unmovable. With experience, you begin to see it clearly. A woman doesn't need a knight to rescue her from her inner mess. She needs a calm space. A presence that doesn't overpower, doesn't rush to fix, but stays steady enough for her to find herself again. When you hold your silence at the right moment, you're not just refraining from speaking. You're giving her something sacred, a mirror. She'll feel it. She'll sense it. He's not swept up in my waves. He's not angry, not cold. He's just present, unhurried. And that feeling, that strange mix of not being able to pull you closer or push you away. That's when her ego softens, not because you threaten to leave, but because she realizes you don't need to be coddled to feel worthy. She lets go because she feels safe. Safe in the quiet stability of a man who doesn't flinch. Safe in a steady presence that demands nothing, yet gives everything. The fewer words you use, the calmer you stay, the more powerful your rhythm becomes. A slow, deep rhythm, grounded, intentional, heavy with substance. And in that pace, she stops trying to lead. She starts listening to herself, and listening to the quiet force standing before her. A man, not loud, not nervous, not trying to impress. Just there. Irreplaceable. 5. Emotional freedom. You don't need her to feel whole. Here's something most men don't realize. The more desperate you are to be loved, the faster you lose yourself. Especially when your sense of worth depends entirely on a woman's presence, her messages, or her emotional reactions. Have you ever felt uneasy when she didn't reply? Anxious when she seemed distant? Less of a man just because she didn't validate you? That's not love. That's lack. A kind of emptiness wearing the mask of romance. But in truth, it's a quiet plea. Fill me. And the harsh reality. The more you need, the more she'll feel the urge to pull away. Because women can sense this energy, even if you never say it aloud. When your emotions revolve around her responses. When her every look or mood controls your sense of self. You're no longer you. You've handed her the keys to your emotional life without even noticing. But the man who draws a woman toward him without chasing is the one who doesn't need her to feel complete. He doesn't beg for approval. He doesn't need her gaze to feel valuable. His love is a gift, not a loan. You love because you choose to, not because you're empty. You care because your heart is already full, not because you're afraid of silence. And that fullness is what draws her in. When you stop demanding, you become safe. When you don't need her to be anything but herself, she feels free. And in that freedom, she starts to choose you, not out of obligation, but desire, because what you choose holds more power than what you crave. When you show up beside her, not clinging, but steady. Every glance, every word, every touch carries weight. She won't feel pressured to perform. She'll feel invited to stay. The less you need, the more freedom you hold. And freedom, real masculine freedom, is irresistibly attractive. A seasoned man knows this. True love isn't about finding someone to fill a hole in your heart. It's about inviting someone into a life that's already whole, not to complete you, but to share it with you. When a woman senses that you're not placing her at the center of your emotional universe, but still deeply value her presence, she understands something rare. You don't need her to survive, but having her in your life is deeply real. And that's when you become a man she doesn't want to lose. Not because you tried to be someone else, but because you were fully, peacefully you.
6. Strategic absence. You don't always have to answer. We've been taught, If you love someone, always be available, respond quickly, show up constantly to prove you care. But there's a strange paradox in love. The more constantly you show up, the less your presence is truly felt. Because women are sensitive to rhythm. When attention is always guaranteed. When responses are immediate. When you're always there like a reflex. Your presence slowly becomes invisible. You might be beside her every day. Yet somehow, she no longer feels you. That's why a man with maturity doesn't show up on autopilot. He chooses when to be present. And just as importantly, he knows when to be silent. He understands. Not answering right away, not reacting every time, isn't neglect. It's preservation. It's creating space so emotions can still breathe. A melody without pauses is just noise. A gaze that never looks away becomes habit. A message replied to instantly every time loses its meaning. A man who doesn't respond immediately isn't playing hard to get. He's simply living his life fully, independently, without letting fleeting emotions dictate his every move. And that natural gap creates something rare. When he does speak, she listens deeper. When he does text, she reads more carefully. When he asks something, she reflects more honestly before replying. You don't need to disappear to get attention. You just need to live deeply enough, so your presence carries weight. Because when you're everywhere, you're actually nowhere. And when your connection is driven by fear of losing it, you're not connecting out of freedom. You're connecting out of fear. But when you allow yourself to have space to live, to breathe, to grow, you also give her a gift. The awareness that your presence is chosen, not automatic. Women don't want to be abandoned, but they're drawn to men who aren't dependent. When she sees you can go a full day, live it fully, without needing constant emotional feedback, she'll begin to adjust, to respect your pace, to rise to meet you. And in that adjustment, something more mature begins to grow. Not attachment, but respect. Not fear of loss, but desire to preserve something valuable. Absence doesn't mean you vanish. It means you step back with intention. So when you return, she doesn't just see you walk in. She feels something important has entered the room. 7. Self-respect. The unspoken language of personal value. There's a kind of attraction that doesn't come from looks, money, or charm. It comes from self-respect. Something you can't borrow, fake, or perform. Women may never say it outright, but they feel it deeply. A man with self-respect makes them pause, makes them weigh their words, makes them think twice before crossing lines. Self-respect is not ego. It doesn't explode. It doesn't sulk. It doesn't need to prove anything. It's quiet, firm, like an invisible boundary surrounding you. And when someone pushes too far, you don't raise your voice. You simply step back, and in that distance, she realizes, this is not a man who can be toyed with. A man with self-respect knows what's unacceptable, and is willing to walk away when it's crossed. No drama, no long speeches, just a clear, grounded decision. I won't stay where I'm no longer whole. A woman may get upset. She may test you. She may throw words that sting. But what earns her lasting respect is not how you argue, but how you stand still in your principles. You don't lower yourself to beg. You don't shrink yourself to please. You don't trade your peace just to be loved. Self-respect teaches you when to speak, and when silence says more. When to stay, and when to walk. When to give, and when to guard your center. Because women test men, often without meaning to see if you'll stay true to yourself when things get uncomfortable. They want to know, can he hold his ground when I push? Will he keep his core steady when emotions run high? And if you say yes to everything, tolerate everything, swallow everything just to keep her, you stop being you. You become a reflection of fear, not of value. But when you hold your line without raising your voice, without becoming harsh, without needing to prove, you send a message far louder than words. She may not smile, but she'll feel it. He's not like the others. And in that difference comes respect. Because the most attractive man isn't the one who pleases everyone. He's the one who dares not to. If it means protecting his peace, He's not begging to stay. But if someone walks away, they'll think long and hard before doing it. Self-respect isn't rebellion. It's not a weapon. It's a quiet allegiance to yourself. And a man who stands by himself will never be treated lightly. 8. When she knows you can walk away. True emotional connection isn't built on promises. It's not built on clinging. It's built on something far more powerful. The awareness that you could leave, but you choose to stay. And when a woman truly feels that, when she senses that your love isn't dependency, that your presence isn't guaranteed out of fear, her whole way of relating to you changes. She stops testing. She stops controlling. She stops trying to bend the rhythm. Not because she's afraid to lose you, but because she respects that you don't need her to feel whole. You might love her deeply. You might care, forgive, make room, but in every word, every action, every silence, there's a line, a quiet boundary that says, I will not stay where I must betray myself. And if that line is crossed, you won't scream, you won't beg, you won't try to win her understanding. You'll turn and walk. Still, calm, certain, not out of spite, but out of devotion to the man you refuse to abandon, yourself. Women can feel this. They know the difference between a man who's afraid to be alone and a man who can let go, without guilt, without noise, without collapse. And that difference? It speaks louder than any confrontation. Sometimes, she won't change when you plead. Not when you explain. Not when you sacrifice your soul just to make it work. But she'll begin to change. When you fall silent. When you pull your energy back. When you vanish from spaces that no longer honor your presence. Because nothing stirs awareness more than losing something familiar. Without warning, without drama, without blame. When you can walk away. Not as a punishment, but as a quiet return to your own truth. You're not just strong. You become unforgettable. Not because you caused pain, but because your absence was so full of presence. It made her look inward for the first time. So never stay in a relationship out of fear. And never leave to prove a point. Only walk away when you're truly standing on solid ground. When you no longer need to be understood to choose your peace. And if she turns back to look, it won't be because you won. It'll be because you had the kind of presence no one wants to lose. 9. Silent certainty. You don't control, yet you lead. Women often say they want a man who listens, who understands, who can walk beside them through all the emotions life brings. And they mean it, but there's something even deeper, something many women don't quite have words for. They struggle to fully trust a man who follows their every feeling. What they truly long for, beneath the surface, is a man who stays rooted in himself. No matter how much they change. Not someone who commands. Not someone who resists. But someone who remains. Like a riverbed under moving water. Still, present, guiding, without force. He can be quiet, even withdrawn. But in that silence, there's clarity. There's direction. He doesn't make decisions to control. He makes them because he knows what matters. He doesn't sway with her moods. He becomes the anchor she adjusts herself to. That's what we call silent certainty. A deep masculine energy that speaks without words. Many men think they have to dominate, to be alpha, to make her submit. But what women respect is not the loudest voice. It's the steady presence that never loses its path. Even when he says nothing. When a woman feels this in you, she relaxes. She stops testing, stops pushing. Because she knows you won't bend for validation. And that gives her something rare. A place to be fully herself. Without leading the dance. You don't have to declare yourself a leader. Just live your truth, quietly, clearly, without preaching. And as you keep your pace, she'll begin to walk with you. Not because you forced her, but because you gave her something worth following. Silent certainty isn't stubbornness. It's not resistance for its own sake. It's knowing what's right for you. And not needing approval to live by it. You're not rebelling. You're not trying to stand out. You're simply not abandoning yourself to keep things peaceful. And in a world full of noise, that calm strength leads people. Whether they realize it or not. Women, even the strongest ones, still crave a place they can lean into. Not physically, emotionally. They want a presence that doesn't flinch, doesn't waver, doesn't need praise, but always, quietly, knows the way. When you become that man, you won't need to earn her trust. You'll be living in a way that makes her offer it freely. Not because you asked, but because she sees. You were never lost to begin with. 10 from wanting to be chosen to becoming the one who chooses. Have you ever found yourself waiting for her reply? Carefully crafting each word, each moment together, hoping she'd see your worth? Hoping, quietly, that this time, she'd pick you? That's how many men experience love. They enter relationships like silent auditions, trying to prove they're good enough, attractive enough, passable, for the final round. And in doing so, they hand over all the power. They let someone else decide what they're worth. But here's the truth. The more you want to be chosen, the easier it is to be discarded. Because now, you're in a race you don't control. You're reacting to expectations. And every move you make becomes about approval. Not about alignment. But something shifts, radically. When you stop asking, am I good enough for her? And start asking, is she aligned with the life I'm building? That shift changes everything. Because now, you're not chasing a role. You're protecting a world you've created with intention, depth, and care. You no longer squeeze yourself to fit someone's frame. You build a life with edges, clear, steady, and invite only those who respect the shape. You don't need to be harsh. You don't need a list of rigid rules. You just live by your truth. And whoever enters your life must meet you there. This doesn't make you arrogant. It makes you clear. And clarity is deeply attractive. A woman doesn't need you to always say yes. She needs to feel you know who you are. And when she senses you don't need her to feel valuable, but still choose her, freely and fully, that's when real connection begins. Because being chosen makes you a receiver of value. But having standards makes you a creator of it. To do that, you must know what matters to you. Not from society, not from her, but from your own soul's design. You become so grounded in that design that your presence itself sends a quiet message. I don't need you to complete me. But if you want to walk with me, bring your wholeness, bring your respect, bring your willingness. When you live this way, you no longer fear being alone. Because you know, value doesn't come from having someone next to you. It comes from never abandoning yourself to keep them there. And ironically, when you stop searching, the right people start showing up. Not because you dazzled them, but because you've become the kind of man who no longer knocks. He simply opens the door and waits to see who walks in with reverence. Conclusion: real attraction doesn't come from tricks. It comes from presence. We live in a time where everything can be learned. There are books that teach you how to text her, videos with 7 psychological hacks to win her heart, forums filled with strategies to score points with women. But let's be honest for a moment. Do those tactics make you more attractive? Or just more exhausted? Sure, you might get a reply. You might make her smile, even stir her emotions. But then what? Can you keep her when everything she felt was based on skills you picked up, not the man you truly are? Because real attraction doesn't come from playing the game better. It comes from how you live your life. Quietly, when no one is watching. It comes from the principles you uphold. From the things you won't compromise. From the silence you keep when words would cost your integrity. A woman isn't drawn to a man who knows the right lines. She's drawn to the one who lives the right way. Even when it's hard. Even when it's lonely. Even when no applause is given. You don't need to be loved to feel worthy. You don't need her approval to know your value. The moment you no longer chase being chosen, you begin to live like a free man. And that freedom, that self-possession, that quiet refusal to abandon yourself, that's what pulls her in. Not because you tried, but because something in your being called to her. You don't need clever words. You don't need to master female psychology. You don't need to become someone else. You only need to become fully yourself. And live from that place. Whether someone stays or walks away. Stoicism, if you've ever studied it, doesn't tell you to be cold. It doesn't ask you to repress emotion or act numb. It teaches you this: that while you can't control everything in life, you can always choose the man you will be in response. It reminds you, dignity is yours, discipline is yours, presence is yours, peace is yours, but only when you stop handing it away. Picture this: a man who doesn't speak often, who doesn't chase, who doesn't decorate himself with bravado. And yet, when he enters the room, people feel something shift. They quiet down when he speaks. They hesitate before disturbing his energy. Not out of fear, but out of respect. This man doesn't try to be unforgettable, but he is, because he never needed to be loud, to be different. That's presence. That's essence. That's the kind of attraction that can't be taught. So if you're on this journey to become a man that women feel drawn to, don't start with tricks. Start with yourself. Start with peace. Start with dignity. Start with the quiet courage to walk away. The moment being loved costs you your truth. And when you live that way, the right woman won't need you to convince her. She'll recognize you, not because you chased her, but because your very being called her home. If these words speak to your soul, don't just keep them in silence. Like, share, and subscribe to Light of Wise Elders, our space for men who live deeply. Stand firmly, and walk freely.